Conversations That Matter is a partner program of the Center for Dialogue at Simon Fraser University. The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. Well, welcome. Thank you for joining me. Downton Abbey, did you have any idea that it was going to be the success that it is?
None of us did, and I think we'd probably all have rewritten our contracts slightly differently. But it has been amazing. What on earth is it exactly that has touched so many people's lives that they've become engaged and have watched it avidly every single Sunday? It's been a phenomenal success. I'm thrilled for PBS. It's increased their donor base. It's been a hugely positive series in so many ways.
Have you been able to figure out what it is that touches so many people?
I think it's about family. It's about the feeling of home. It's about a slightly nostalgic and romantic view, looking back in the past when perhaps we're worried about the everyday life which kind of hits us in the face at tremendous speed, and perhaps it's just a little window into the past and what mattered to people then, the principles, the manners, the courtesy, a little bit of time for yourself.
So in the development of the story of Downton Abbey, you started to do research and you started to uncover this wealth of information about Lady Almina. And that led you, of course, to write the book, Lady Almina and the Real Countess of Downton Abbey.
It did. I knew about Almina for some time, and then when Downton Abbey came out, and I realised that Julian was going to turn Highclere into a convalescent home, I thought, my goodness, this is a chance for me to write about an extraordinary woman and what really happened, just to share some of the stories which I thought were wonderful, about the lives and adventures of the people who lived there.
Well, let's just start with who her father was.
I know. I've got a contract in the castle archives of the real bound copy, because the contract is a marriage contract between Lord Carnarvon, Alfred de Rothschild, and Almina Carnarvon. So her real father was Alfred de Rothschild, and he had a long-standing affair with her mother, a Catholic.
And affair is the operative word there, isn't it?
He was never married, Maria Boyer, and when he launched Almina into society, he adored his daughter and her mother. He wanted her to have the chance of marrying into society, and the Earl of Carnarvon thought he wasn't going to marry for money, but there's a very good Jane Austen line that it may be foolish to marry without money. So he ended up marrying Almina. So I start Almina wondering, was this just a contract or was there love and friendship? Where did the story start?
Well, because Lord Carnarvon needed the money. He was not a spendthrift. He didn't keep a close eye on the bank account.
He was good at spending money. But he wasn't poor by any means. We had 5 estates at that time. He had a house in London, but the revenues every year had decreased, actually mainly because of Canadian wheat coming over into the UK.
Those darn Canadians, yeah.
Darn Canadians.
Yeah.
So the incoming agricultural products from the British Empire meant that it was much harder to sustain farming agricultural revenues within England. So before, in a sense, the situation got too desperate, many of the great English aristocratic families were marrying industrial money, or in this case, banking money, and in this case, furthermore, something wonderful called cash. £500,000, £30 million today perhaps, in cash. Glorious.
That was the dowry.
That was the dowry.
My gosh. Just before we get to that, it's interesting, in reading the book, I start to get the sense that Highclere Castle and the rest of the Carnarvon estates, you realize that they were a center of influence and commerce. Like, they provided tremendous employment as well as generated revenue.
The estates still provide quite a lot of commerce and employment today. There's possibly 140 or 150 full and part-time people and who work for us and with us. And around that, there's the hotels. We buy our food locally. People come and stay in bed and breakfast, pubs. Everything. The taxis think we're wonderful. All the taximen picking all the visitors up from the Newbury railway station to come in. So it was a centre of business and support for the local community. We have been in business at Highclere for 1,300 years.
1,300 years.
It's all right.
It's in the same place, but the castle today is not the castle that was there 1,300 years ago.
No, but inside the main fireplace, which you see in the saloon, the main Great Hall as they call it, in Downton Abbey, behind that fireplace is the old medieval fireplace from the 13th century.
Still there.
Still there. And apparently there's quite a few tunnels and hidden secret chambers, but I'd have to break down the walls. I'm not going to do that.
Oh, so you haven't explored them all?
No, not at all. I don't know. I know there's a few passages, but do you know, I haven't got the time to go there. I'm not that bothered. I think I'll leave them be. Don't know what's in there.
Yeah. So back to Almina. She marries Earl Carnarvon and becomes the Earl of Carnarvon and becomes the Countess.
Yes.
And they threw a party that, as I understand, is still considered to be like the party of all time.
Almina threw a lot of good parties, and her father threw very good parties for her. And then 6 months after they were married, they welcomed the Prince of Wales,
the future king,
to Highclere, the future king. And he was, I suppose, in today's world, something like the President of the US and the Queen of England all rolled into one, because, you know, I think 25% of the globe was coloured pink, representing parts of the British Empire and colonies. It was a tremendous weekend of prestige and grandeur, and Almina spent a lot of money. So by comparison, I look quite good value today. Much less expensive.
How important do you think that as a true coming out for her as Lady Carnarvon would have been to her and to her father?
I think very important to the two of them. I think Lord Carnarvon was not so fussed. He was quite happy wearing his old darned jacket the minute he left the church and had got married. He loved his shooting, he loved travel, he came to be obsessed and passionate about Egypt. So he lived a lot more through books and through technologies and cars and collecting. But Almina loved to throw a good party, and he was very happy. He'd come down and say hello sometimes, and often then retire upstairs with a friend like Prince Dulip Singh, and they'd have a nice evening together. And she'd have a little party for 500 people.
500 people?
Just in Highclere Castle. So compared to that, perhaps the crew and cast of Downton Abbey were not such great numbers.
I got to get you to hang on for just a second while we take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back. Conversations That Matter is a not-for-profit program made possible thanks to the charitable support of the following and from viewers like you. Please visit conversationsthatmatter.tv and help us to continue to produce this program. Thank you. I can't help but kind of go off on little sidebars because you talk about the crew and cast. What was it like when they descended upon the castle? What did that do to you and your ability to move around in your home?
Highclere's been open to the public since 1988-89, so it's never been a private house. And when they're not here and we're not open to the public, there's tours or dinners or lunches. So it's a busy place. You have to remember to be silent. Sometimes actually one of the dog's tails got into trouble because it was wagging and someone batted it. So there's funny things like that in the background. But it was busy, but we'd done other films before, which was lucky. Eyes Wide Shut, Secret Garden, Prince of Thieves, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, some of that had been shot with us, Jeeves and Wooster, bits of Poirot, Inspector Morse. So it was useful having a little bit of background so you didn't go into it completely cold.
So after this huge party that Almina throws for the Prince of Wales, does this legitimize her in society at that time?
If you read about her wedding, when people arrived, there were the Ephrussis and the Rothschilds, the Marlboroughs, the great ducal families, and her nominal family. So it was fascinating how there seemed to be less snide remarks, less tension against an arriviste than perhaps you might expect today. That's
because they all knew her lineage, didn't they?
It was accepted and not spoken about. She's not on a Rothschild family tree. She is on our family tree. We have photographs of her father, so it's an interesting situation.
So she's not on the official Rothschild's family tree. And yet, if you look up Alfred Rothschild, you see that she is online as being his daughter.
Absolutely, and he left most of his fortune to her. So in 1918, when he died, much of his fortune went to Almina. And that was, again, one of the things that saved the castle, because much of his extraordinary collection of art was sold to pay death duties after the death of her husband. And therefore her son, who became the 6th Earl, could live at Highclere. And without that legacy, again, that Rothschild legacy, I don't think we'd have made it through.
There wouldn't be a Downton Abbey.
No?
No. We all benefit, those who enjoy watching the show, to decisions that were made back then. Yeah. So she has now entered Highclere Castle. She's the lady of the house. Time starts to march forward. They have some children, and the war breaks out. Is this the time that gives Almina her greatest purpose in life?
I think it is, and although she was the predecessor of the 6th Countess, it's Almina who, because of money actually, because of the ability to do things and make her own decisions, she created a hospital, a vocation for herself, and a deep sense of purpose throughout her remaining life. She learned about nursing because her father, her husband rather, had become ill several times through many car crashes. She'd become a nurse as well as a wife. And then going forwards, she had decided to turn the castle into a hospital, employ 30 nurses. She liked pretty nurses. She thought they made men get better quicker. Sympathetic nurses who
Are you
paid
sure?
scrabble.
Wouldn't it have the opposite effect?
Well, I found some great
I think I'm
stories.
going to hang around here a little longer. Yeah.
I'm not going to tell them on TV, but they're in the book. And some of those got picked up in Downton as well. But it had an operating theatre, and I've brought with me a letter from a lady in Winnipeg who wrote to Almina to thank her for saving her son's life. It's incredibly moving. So that collection of letters, to me, lies at the heart of Almina. It's a woman who gave her money to heal and make people better.
This is our second break. We'll be back in a moment. Conversations That Matter is a not-for-profit program made possible thanks to the charitable support of the following and from viewers like you. Please visit conversationsthatmatter.tv and help us to continue to produce this program. Thank you. Her husband has, as you pointed out, been injured in a few car crashes. Yeah. His health is compromised, so she nurses him, extends that out into what she's doing through the hospital at Highclere Castle. But then she realizes, oh my gosh, the need is beyond what we can provide here. What happens then? How does her father re-enter the picture and play a vital role? Well,
Alfred de Rothschild never leaves Almina's life. He's always there in the background to support her. I think he provides, support in terms of her secretary, in terms of builders, carpenters, in terms of money for nurses, direction, and then halfway through the First World War, when the hospital at Highclere is overflowing, she then leases a big building in London near where all the doctors are operating from, Harley Street and Wimpole Street, and she opens that as Lady Carnarvon's London Hospital. And she carries on with that until the end of the war. After her father's death and later on in her life in 1926, she then opens a subsequent hospital in London called Alfred's House in memory of her father, and that she runs until she's closed by the British government in 1941 because it's in the middle of London. It was in Portland Place, near to where the BBC is today.
Oh my
Amazing
gosh.
woman.
So when we take a look at the number of people who came back, number of men who came back during the First World War, devastated by the horrors of the trench warfare, how many people do you think that she was able to nurse them back to, a productive life? And what kind of contribution is that?
She felt she was just doing what she could in her own small way. In 1922, she was offered an OBE by King George V and Queen Mary, and she turned it down because she said she'd done no more than she ought to have done, and she'd done no more than other women like her had done. Actually, she was described by General Sir John Cowans as another Florence Nightingale, as an exceptional nurse, exceptional head matron. But perhaps she's just an example of what many other women did, but she did it very well, and she saved hundreds of men's
Well,
lives.
she was being a bit modest there, wasn't she? Like the hours that she put in were extraordinary.
She didn't think about it. You know, I don't think that was not her concern. She was utterly focused on what she was doing. She enjoyed it. She was good at it, and she was going to do it well.
Mm-hmm. So, the interesting thing about the war, of course, is that it interrupted her and the Earl of Carnarvon's Egypt, expeditions.
Yeah.
Well, let's sort of rewind a little bit to the early teens, and Earl Carnarvon is an Egyptologist, and
Yeah.
Almina is going with him constantly to Egypt. Tell me a little bit about that aspect of their lives.
After one of Lord Carnarvon's worst car crashes, he nearly died.
Yes.
And Almina managed to save his life and bring him, put him back together again. He suffered terrible migraines because there was no Anadin Extra. You know, you or I have a headache, we take Anadin Extra or paracetamol. There was nothing of that. You lay down in a darkened room. But anyway, Lord Carnarvon recovered, but he was told by his doctors to leave the wintry, wet climes and go somewhere dry for the winter. So he went to Egypt. And that's where his obsession, passion for Egypt developed. He didn't just want to do the parties, he wanted to have something to do. And hence he began his work as an archaeologist. 2 or 3 years later, he was then introduced to Howard Carter, and there began their collaboration. It was paused during the First World War and then resumed in 1919 when Lord Carnarvon at the time took a boat and sailed back across the Mediterranean, past quite a few bombs, it would seem, floating around in the Mediterranean Sea, and on ships which were probably infected. They were probably not the cleanest ships either, but they made it out to Alexandria, took a train down to Cairo, and then carried on down to the Valley of the Kings. Lord Carnarvon had the concession to the Valley of the Kings, and the next 2 or 3 years built up to the final discovery of the tomb of Tutankhamun, the first global world media event 90 years ago. Phenomenal.
But that was almost didn't happen because Lord Carnarvon was saying, I don't know that I want to continue to finance this, because it was a lot of money.
He had run out of money. Our income tax in 1914 was 6%. In 1918, it was 60% in England, and our debt to America had increased tenfold. So after the First World War, there was super tax, lots of taxes, just as we have today, very boring. And he was trying to work out where the revenues were coming from to pay the taxes. So he'd said to Howard Carter in June 1922, I'm going to have to call a halt with this. This is the last year we can do it. So they went out a little bit early that year. And in November, on November the 4th, Howard Carter thought he'd found the first step to the tomb of Tutankhamun's tomb.
I've got to get you to hang on one last time. We'll be back right after this. Conversations That Matter is a not-for-profit program made possible thanks to the charitable support of the following and from viewers like you. Please visit conversationsthatmatter.tv and help us to continue to produce this program. Thank you. He uncovers it and realizes what he's found. Sends message to Lord Carnarvon, who's
And
not there, right?
No, he'd gone out ahead because
Yeah.
Lord Carnarvon was still enjoying the shooting, the
Yes.
handwritten messages.
Yeah.
And he would normally go out about New Year's Day. So I suppose the Carson of the time, Stretfield, would have gone into the library, and said, I have a telegram, my lord. And it was the most extraordinary news. And Howard Carter waited for his friend and colleague and patron until he made it out there.
Because that would be about a 3-week journey, wouldn't it?
It was a 2-week journey
2 week,
at that time,
okay.
but yes, it is 2 to 3 weeks.
So he gets there, they go, and because Howard Carter had covered it back up to protect it, correct?
Yeah,
They open what was the entrance to the antechamber.
yes.
What did they discover when they walked in
every schoolboy's dream of treasure, isn't it? And Howard Carter had made a little hole through the wall, and Lord Carnarvon said, what can you see? And Howard Carter said, wonderful things. My goodness, I don't know how else you could reply. And then that's where the beginning of that story. But it is it was an extraordinary story, but Lord Carnarvon's health was compromised already, so a little bit later on when after they were moving on to knocking through the walls of the final tomb in February 1923, he was bitten by a mosquito and famously got septicemia and finally pneumonia.
Well, Almina wasn't in Egypt at the time, was she?
No.
She was in England, so they wire her,
I know.
and she travels at lightning speed, almost today's speed, to get there.
She does travel fast because Geoffrey de Havilland had made his first flight from Highclere in 1910. That was the first airborne flight in England. Amazingly exciting. So there was a relationship with de Havilland, who after the war, for which he was part of the flying, the early RAF, had rented back some of the planes and turned himself into a plane rental business. So she hired a pilot, put herself and a doctor in the plane, and started to fly down to Cairo to try and make it to her husband's bedside. And I find that the saddest thing, because when she arrives, for all the men, all the husbands' lives she saved, for all the fathers, all the sons, she couldn't save her own husband's life. So it was devastating, and her father had sadly died 2 or 3 years earlier, so she was now alone for the first time in her life.
Tell me about Lord Carnarvon's dog on the night that he died.
Extraordinary, isn't it? The night that he died, all the lights went out in Cairo. They say they couldn't find out why, but I'm sure they went out from time to time. But back in England at Highclere, at the very same time that Lord Carnarvon died in Cairo, his dog Susie died. So we think his dog Susie is buried with him on the top of Beacon Hill.
It's extraordinary.
I know.
I had read that the dog Susie yelped once
And
and
rolled over
died.
and died. Sixth sense, isn't it? It's amazing. We probably know so little as people, really, don't we?
Yeah, isn't that extraordinary? So, but the work of excavating the tomb of Tutankhamun is not done. And it really took Almina to finance the rest of that excavation, didn't it?
It was. I was talking to a German professor of Egyptology today, Dr. Verena Lepper, who runs the Berlin Museum, Noise Museum. And she said to me, she wanted to say to me, she said, Fiona, there's one person who's always left out. One of the greatest legacies to all of us was the fact that Almina Carnarvon paid for Howard Carter to continue the excavation of Tutankhamun's tomb. He was probably the best person. He recorded, photographed it, took care of it. And that was an extraordinary legacy to leave to all of us today. In 1936, the Egyptian government then paid Almina back all her costs of the excavation. So they also had a stake in the discovery. So they paid her back £36,000, which in that sort of time was a huge amount of money. And Howard Carter had come back to England and in some ways was to die in 1939, a disconsolate and sad man. It had never brought him huge happiness. Other people seem to have benefited from the discovery. And he lost his tremendous friend and colleague, Lord Carnarvon.
You pointed out that it was the first mass media, the largest global event outside of the war.
Yeah.
It was extraordinary. So we can thank Lady Almina, whose life beyond the period that we're talking about right now became quite colorful. There's research for people to do. Let's not spoil it for them. Thank you very much.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
you doing this.
Thank you.